Poetic and Prophetic books. 10, Joel and Amos. Okay, they might have as well have said Hosea with just the other one. Joel, 800 BCE. This prophet must have lived somewhat earlier than Hosea, and probably exercised his ministry in the time of Joash, the king of Israel, and Amaziah, king of Judah. The writings of the prophet are not extensive, but they are of considerable interest. Well, we don't know how big or small some of these books actually were, when they were sent down. The main subject of this prophecy is the terrible judgments of God which were to come upon the people for their persistent disobedience. But he predicts repentance and reformation and the consequent restoration. Through all these, he seems to have grand visions of the glory of the Messianic times and the prosperity of the people of God. And, so there's a reason why that Jesus was not accepted as the age-changing Messiah, because the prosperity and peace and stuff like that didn't quite come. Christianity brings with it more violence and oppression than all faiths in history combined. Now, secularism is 10 times that, but so how would you overturn those reasons and say, well, oh no, Christianity made things better? The proximate events which answered to the chief predictions were a grievous drought and a plague of locusts, which so devastated the land that the inhabitants were in great distress. This led to repentance, but reformation on the part of the people and consequent deliverance. But doubtless these were meant also to symbolize on a larger scale the future of the nation, and they contained intimidations of more extensive calamities which should issue in a more radical and permanent reformation. They also look forward in a general way to the establishment of the Christian church and its triumph in the earth. To this refers the glowing passage in chapter 3 quoted by Peter on the day of Pentecost. And just like Joseph Smith's quotes don't always quite match up with the King James Version of the Bible, you can see how some of the New Testament quotes and allusions don't quite, or even stronger, don't match up with some of the stuff in what they call the Old Testament. But in general, they are, they are touching upon the same thing. Amos, 787 BCE. And this prophet was obviously of humble origin, having been in his youth a herdsman. Having been in his youth a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit, and had not been educated in the schools of the prophets, nor received any special training for the prophetic office. His residence and probable birthplace was Tekoa, about 12 or 15 miles south from Jerusalem. Remember, Gehenna was in between. The larger part of his ministry was among his own people in the kingdom of Judah, but he at one time visited the Israelitish dominion and preached powerfully against the idolatry of the land and predicted the dire judgments because of it. It wasn't all idolatry. Some of it was they thought God had children and other sorts of polytheism, but it wasn't all get out the idols, On this account, Amaziah, the idolatrous priest, on the altar of Bethel, complained of him to the king, and drove him out of the country. 7:10-17. See, wasn't Bethel one of the places that was sanctified by a prophet? So what people do there doesn't mean that it's the thing. It has its inherent history, and you can, the people can decide to take away the idols and all that stuff. 7:10-17. The style of Amos is clear and forcible. The imagery is homely and apt. Much of it is drawn from rustic and agricultural usages. The following are the more obvious divisions of the book. 1. A denunciation of the sins of the neighboring nations. The true Goyim, but Goyim does not mean foreigner. Well, Goyim is the Gawiya is the individual, and Gawim. 1 through 2, 3. The description of the moral conditions of Judah and Israel. 2, 4 through 6, 14. A reflection upon previous discourses, and a narration of the prophet's visit to Bethel, and declaration of the impending punishment of the wicked nation and the false priest. 7, 1 through 9, 10. A forward look to the time of the Messiah's kingdom and the happiness of God's people. 9, 11 through 15. And shouldn't this be something that the people group together and reform society themselves somehow? The time of the prophet Joel. What can you say of his writings? What predictions have had a literal fulfillment, and of what were the predictions symbolical? So if they don't like the literal, they'll say, well, okay, there's some sort of metaphorical way we can say that this came true or will happen. What is said concerning the effect of the drought and the plague of the insects? 1, 4, 12, and 16 are the verses. What description is given of the locusts and their devastation? 1, 6, and 7. 2, 2 through 10. What measures were proposed to avert the evil? 1, 14. 2, 12 through 17. What consequences promised? 19 through 26. What prediction of remarkable events which were to occur in latter times, and which was quoted in the New Testament as being then fulfilled? 2, 28 through 32. What was the condition of life, the condition in life of the prophet Amos? At what time and where did he live? Where did he exercise his prophetic office? The effect of his mission to the kingdom of Israel. 7, 10 through 17. The general style of the book, the divisions of the treatise. Against what nations does the prophet denounce the divine judgments? 1 and 2. What illustrations of the greatness and power of God are given? 4, 13, 5, 8, 9, 2, 3, 5, 6. What instances of transgression and sin are cited? 2, 8, 4, 1, 5, 7, 6, 4 through 6. What promises of peace and prosperity in the latter days are made? 9, 13 through 15. Now, yeah, it's up to us to fulfill which of these that we're going to fulfill, right? As a society. It's not that the messages aren't out there, that we need a living leader necessarily to point out and say, hey, remember these things that you knew about? I'm here to tell you to follow them. It's like, well, are things not to do, and that